Aamer leads McKinsey's work in technology, helping businesses and technology leaders to transform their organizations by accelerating adoption of technology and cutting-edge management practices, and by skilling up the technology talent to adapt and thrive in a rapidly evolving environment. Aamer helps tech-enable clients for the future. He also leads McKinsey's digital client service work for advanced industries, which includes aerospace and defense, automotive and assembly, and industrials and electronics. So please join me in welcoming Aamer Baig.
Thank you, Alan, for the great introduction. The countdown clock has started, so I will start, and presume people will come in as they see fit. As Alan said, my name is Aamer Baig. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey and lead McKinsey Technology globally, which is our client service for the CIO community, hence most of you. It is a great privilege for me to speak to all of you on the topic of tech transformation, specifically on modernization. We'll cover 3 topics. One is why it's important, which you all will probably agree with, how to make the important decisions, and then how to partner with your CEOs and CFOs to get this going, perhaps in a way that has not been done before. So before we begin, why don't we start with 4 vignettes and ask the question, what do these have in common? An airline that had to cancel thousands of flights because of weather delays, but also because of frailties in their operational systems and operational processes. A whistleblower saying a social media site had about a fifth of all its data sets that were not registered, and half of its servers in non-compliant mode. Before that, there was a pipeline company that was penetrated by a cyber attack that caused a cascading effect across multiple sectors and led to the President of the United States declaring a state of emergency for that specific incident. And then before that, an e-commerce site crashing on Black Friday, and in the post-mortem, the CEO said it had to do with our technology platforms, infrastructure, and IT operations. All about technology. But the implications were actually quite profound, and we found them to be in 4 categories, and hopefully they resonate with you. 1, not surprisingly, there's an immediate and significant drop in revenue. 2nd, there's an impact on your reputation and brand. Sometimes that's recoverable. 3rd, in the thrust to overcorrect and over-respond, we overspend, sometimes to the tune of 2 to 3 times what it takes to address the problem preemptively. And the 4th, much less known, regulators get involved and require prescriptive changes when it affects the public or the consumers, not just for you, but also for your peers. What is behind all of this? Many times it is tech debt. We call it the silent killer. It is, there are many definitions for it, but in this instance, we'll call it the tax a company pays for all its development to redress existing technology issues. How big is this? When we did this research, we found close to 20 to 40% of an IT balance sheet made up of technical debt. Just like financial debt, you don't aim to go to 0, but you cannot be over-leveraged. We also found that many CIOs are redirecting 15 to 20% of their project spend to address technology debt issues, and they find themselves falling behind. that while that problem is widespread, it is not consistent across all companies. In fact, we find in our research that some manage it better and some manage it very, very well. We developed this concept called a technology debt score. Think of this as equivalent to a credit score but related to technology in an enterprise. This calculates a tech debt score based on a company's tech management practices. The higher the score, the better optimized you are. The lower you are, the lower optimized you are. It doesn't mean you don't spend on tech debt. In fact, some of the lower scoring companies spend quite a bit, but perhaps not in the right places. And the top 20%, we find, reap quite a bit of rewards. And what are they? They're the type of rewards your CEOs and CFOs care about. We find the outcomes are meaningful. 10% higher growth, 50% more release of your engineering capacity to high-value products and services, and 15% more likelihood of having a successful transformation. The opposite is even more profound. For companies that were in the low 20%, there was a 40% higher likelihood of transformations being canceled or overrunning. Folks, this is meaningful. There's a direct quantified link between tech debt and business performance. You have to make that clear to your stakeholders. Now, how does this happen? You all know this better than I would probably ever will. We call it how it spreads and strangles, continuing the metaphor of being a silent killer. But let me make an attempt. It almost always starts as a vicious downward cycle. Badly written code, short-term fixes, temporary changes that become permanent, not updating software, the list goes on and on and on. But it always comes down to one thing. We kick the can down the road. It starts with a short-term pressure, coupled with limited insights on what actually the true costs are and the implications. In discussions, we often hear of what are perfect storm events or edge cases. Pandemics, geopolitics, bad weather, cyber attacks, spike in traffic, probabilistically low and dismissed. And that results in duct tape and Band-Aids on top of duct tape and Band-Aids. In business terms, we call it increased cost and complexity. In not so technical terms, we've called it spaghetti code and spaghetti sprawl of solutions. That leads to a drag on delivery. Essentially, now and in the future, it costs more, it's riskier, it's harder, much more than it would have been had we made the right trade-offs when we started. Not surprisingly, 62% of those we surveyed said they've tangibly seen their tech debt rise beyond an optimized level over the last few years. So what do we do about it? We call it, how do you regain the edge? This requires a partnership with the CFO and the CEO to work together to solve this problem. This is a business problem, as we just saw. We're not talking about specific technical fixes. And we think the partnership needs to happen in 3 areas. We call it the insight edge, the commitment edge, and the execution edge. Let's start with insights. The idea here is to create a balance sheet for IT that a CEO and CFO can understand and help make trade-offs. This is not a trivial task. You have to first identify all the assets, whether it's an application or database, an API, what have you. You have to calculate the cost you need to spend to pay down the debt. We call it the principal. And then the interest you'd save, which is the opportunity cost or the excess cost that you spend the business, the operations people, and the technologists in working around the tech debt. When you put that on a chart like this, it becomes very clear where modernization adds value and where it destroys value. Not all tech debt is the same. Armed with that, you need commitments. Some companies, when they know the tech debt is very, very significant in certain assets, price debt into all development. There's a separate tech debt budget that certain development teams have. You have to fund and protect for the long term. This requires will and commitment from the CFO. In one of our clients, for a specific asset class, if I can call it that, the CEO wanted to personally sign off and approve exceptions to paying down the tech debt because it was so significant. And then the third is establishing your MO. There's a purposeful play on words. MO could be a modus operandi, which is zero or low tolerance to tech debt. Maybe you don't want to be below the median in that curve we saw in the previous page. And the MO could also be your modernization office, which has both a technical and a financial leadership assigned to it. And how do you make it executable? And how do you make it sustained? We think it starts with the product teams. You build it, you fix it. Some product teams in companies we work with set aside at least 2 sprint cycles every quarter to clean up tech debt. It's that sort of commitment that's needed. Many of you have QBRs, quarterly business reviews, in place to focus on feature delivery. Perhaps you should also include tech debt in that and be somewhat interventionist and forensic. Understand why progress is not being made to get to the root cause, and when it's being made, how do you apply the best practices elsewhere? And then the third, perhaps more importantly, you need transparency at a level beyond the CEO, board level as well. And the reason is very simple. Many modernization efforts and large tech transformations outlast the tenure of the existing leadership team. Many of us initiate transformations but don't see it through. If you just look at the churn, if I can use that word, among the management ranks, particularly in technology, it's quite telling. The board of directors plays a very important role in making sure that capital is protected and the focus gets maintained. And then finally, as we saw, tech debt is a business problem that can be solved with granular analyses, good governance structures, decision-making, commitment, and sustained execution. But it's also a leadership problem as well. I'm convinced when leaders have the will, they find a way. And we have 3 vignettes just to end on a bit of a high, since I started with a bit of a downer. So let's start with something out of the arena. Tom Peck in the previous panel talked about the military, so perhaps he was channeling this. In the Ukraine-Russia war, it's widely known now that digital technologies are making a difference in the battlefield and in society. Real-time intelligence from mobile phones and drones delivered to the front lines. 3D printed harnesses that are being attached to commercial drones that carry grenades. And then, yes, as simple as automating payroll to the front lines, happening all digitally. So it's not surprising that their Minister of Digital said they've done a technological leapfrog in 10 months when their adversary has been preparing for 20 years. That's the impact of a tech transformation or a digital disruption of an incumbent, if there is one. Closer to home, in telehealth, just a few weeks after the pandemic shutdowns, many hospitals and physician groups started offering telehealth. In weeks, when in those same organizations, many of them had timelines that had a multi-year delivery timeline. From multiple years, it went to multiple weeks. The technology was ready. The leadership will needed to be there to make things happen. And then finally, even closer to home, not few weeks, but immediately after the shutdown, you all delivered in fantastic fashion in allowing remote work almost immediately. That was the CIO's moment, and you all delivered fabulously. So I'm convinced when there's a will, there's a way. And I will end by saying it has to be this generation of technology and business leaders that have to address the tech debt and modernization, as the can cannot be kicked down the road even more. With that, I'll end. I'll be around rest of the day to answer any questions and perhaps take any feedback and perspectives you have through the rest of the day. Thank you very much.